Speaking about Africa, somebody is calling you out here. He says that you don't have a moral authority to speak about African issues. Let's go to Jonah Gasana Jr. from Uganda. Wonders why, Shaka, you live in the United States of America. He says you have no impact on African politics. Why should anybody ask you anything about Africa? Why can't you focus on American politics rather than African politics?
You know, it is very interesting that Mr. Gasanani is saying what you just said, because in fact, if I did not have an impact, to be very honest with you, he probably wouldn't have wasted his time, his valuable time, taken advantage of the fact that we are now on Shaka, etc. time, so that he is able to ask that particular question. And I think that he asked the question precisely because I have an impact. And I have to have a moral obligation, in fact have an inalienable right, a birthright, to be concerned, to worry, and to think about what happens to Africa, because what happens to Africa happens to Shaka Sali and other millions and perhaps a billion people on the African continent. I am a kid who was born from a place called Kavale, southwestern Uganda. I am from Africa. I am an African, no matter, in fact, where I live. And by the way, the responsibility even for being concerned about Africa should not be limited simply to people who live on the African continent or people who were born there. Because I remember a great American, a man who sometimes is referred to as the American conscience, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., at one time talked about how injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. When you are talking about justice and injustice and what have you, you are not talking about ghettos here, slums and what have you. You cannot ghettoize injustice. You cannot put injustice in slum. That is a universal value. Everybody is affected. The world is connected. And by the way, the last time I checked, most of Africa, if not all, most of Africa, with the exception perhaps of Ethiopia, was actually colonized by European powers. And guess where, in fact, the movement for the decolonization of Africa began? It did not necessarily begin on the African continent by people like Gasanani. It actually began among people who were Africans but in the diaspora. You're talking about a man called Marcus Garvey from Jamaica, but actually who made his name fighting against racism and social political injustice in Harlem, up Manhattan.
George Padmore.
George Padmore, another man from the island, William Sylvester Williams, I'm told. And then you're talking about Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, a man who got a PhD in sociology from Harvard, by the way, in 18-something. Can you imagine somebody getting a PhD at that
I visited the Du Bois Center in Accra. Yeah,
you
Ghana.
did?
Yes.
Yeah, you saw where they buried him and his wife.
Right.
And this was a man, in fact, including, you can also talk about people like Paul Robeson, who was a legally trained mind. He had a degree from Columbia University in law. He was a great American footballer from Rutgers University in New Jersey. He was a great actor, but he couldn't practice his craft in the time of Jim Crow in the United States. He ended up in the United Kingdom. And guess what? He ended up hanging out with people like Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria, the man who became Nigeria's first president, and a man who was arguably one of the first people to get PhDs from Nigeria, and from Africa for that matter. People like the Osajefo, the Redeemer, the kid from Nkroful, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, people like the great Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya. Those were some of the people that these guys actually became mentors and said, you know what, you need to be decolonized. You need to have freedom to be in charge of your affairs. So when he talks about freedom, you do not worry about where the message is coming from. I am definitely concerned about Africa, not only because I'm an African, but because I am a human being. There was a French philosopher who was called Descartes, who actually said, I think, therefore I am. And that was part of the reason why slavery, in fact, was ended. Because Africans finally were seen to be human beings.
Let's move along,
like
Shaka. Let's move along.
That young person, whoever it is, he should know that when we talk about things that are happening in Africa and are not so good, it's not because we hate Africa. No. It's because we love Africa and we love ourselves. And I'm talking about humanity.